Good morning, class. This is Reader's Workshop. We are working with traditional literature. And before I start reading, I want you to pay attention to the punctuation marks in your reading to change your voice, and for quotation marks as well to be that character's voice. So, this is a period, so when you come to a period, stop and then continue. Here's your exclamation mark. This is where you would be excited or you're yelling, "Happy birthday!" This is a question mark where you're asking a question. Your voice naturally goes up and you're waiting for an answer. Who are you? This is a comma that would come between words within a sentence. Stop, take a breath, count to 3, continue reading. These are quotation marks, so whatever words are in between here is telling you what's coming out of the character's mouth, the person or thing's mouth. So change your voice to be that person. I also want you to focus on the character or characters in the story. Who are they? Why are they in the story? Are they causing a problem, or are they giving us a solution? Are they nice? Are they kind? Are they young? Are they old? Always keep that in mind. So, the traditional literature story I'm picking is Anne of Green Gables. And I'm going to give you a little tidbit about, information about the original author. The original author was L.M. Montgomery. She was in the 1800s, so it's about a little over 100 somewhat years as a writer. Adapted, that means this author changed the story a little bit to make it her own, by Rebecca Grzulis. Illustrated, the drawer is Kathy Mitchell. Has the 5:30 train come? Matthew asked the station master. Come and go, sir, replied the station master, but there was a passenger dropped off for you, a little girl. She's outside. But I'm expecting a boy, said Matthew nervously. You better expect things to her, the station master said. Matthew sighed and walked down the platform. He was a shy man, and talking to people was not easy for him. The girl was 11 years old and had red hair. She wore an old dress and a faded brown sailor hat, but her eyes were bright. Are you Mr. Matthew Colbert of Green Gables? She asked. I was afraid you weren't coming. I was about to climb into the cherry tree all white with bloom. Matthew could not tell this girl with the glowing eyes that there has been a mistake. I'm sorry, I'm late, said Matthew softly. That's okay, said the girl. I'm very glad you've come. It's wonderful. I'm going to live with you. I've never belonged to anyone before. So she must be an orphan. She doesn't have any parents. As Matthew began to drive to Green Gables, the girl broke off a branch of cherry blossoms when it brushed against the side of the buggy, the wagon that's being pulled by a horse. This is the bloomiest place, she said. Matthew was quiet, but the girl continued to chatter, to talk. Am I talking too much, she asked. I can stop, but it's hard. You can talk as much as you like, Matthew said. I really don't mind. Is there a brook, water, anywhere near Green Gables? Asked the girl. Well, yes, said Matthew. There's one right below the house. I've always wanted to live near a brook, she said. It would make me happy, but I can't be exactly perfectly happy because, well, what color is this? The girl held up one of her braids to show Matthew. It's red, right? He said. Yes, red, she said. Now you see why I can never be exactly perfectly happy. Red hair will be my lifetime sorrow. Red hair would be make her very sorry, unhappy. Soon Matthew was rounding the curve that led to Green Gables. That's Green Gables. That's Green Gables, isn't it? She asked, pointing. Yes, you've guessed it, said Matthew. As soon as I saw it, I knew it was home, she said, and Matthew stirred uneasily in his chair. He knew what was coming. He would see Marilla, his sister, standing on the porch. She was staring hard at him. Like, what on earth is going on? Because here's a girl and they were expecting a boy. Here's the girl at the station. Over here. And over here, they're in the buggy being pulled to the house. Matthew Cuthbert. Who's that? Marlena asked. Where is the boy? There wasn't any boy, said Matthew. There was only her. This is a pretty piece of business, Marlena said, and went into the house. The girl followed Marilla into the kitchen. Then she burst into tears. You don't want me? She cried. You don't want me because I'm not a boy? She sat at the table, buried her face in her hands, and cried. Marilla and Matthew looked at each other. Neither knew what to do. There's no need to cry, said Marilla. There is, the girl said. You would cry too if you were an orphan and came to a place you thought was going to be home and found out they didn't want you. Well, don't cry, said Marilla. You'll stay here tonight. What is your name? Anne, said the girl, but Anne is such an unromantic name. Fiddlesticks, said Marilla. Anne is a very sensible name. Well then, said the girl, please call me Anne, spelled with an E. If you'll call me Anne, spelled with an E, I shall try to live with it. Very well, Anne with an E, said Marilla. And here you see the sister fussing at the brother over here. And Anne crying because they wanted a boy, not a girl. Soon Matthew and Marilla sat down to supper with their guest, but Anne only nibbled some bread. You're not eating anything, said Marilla. Can you eat when you're in the deep of despair? She goes, can you eat when you're so upset? Anne asked. I've never been in the depths of despair, said Marilla. Please don't be mad because I can't eat, said Anne. I guess she's tired, said Matthew. Best put her to bed. Marilla lit a candle and led Anne upstairs to the east gable bedroom. Undress and get into bed, said Marilla. I'll be back shortly for the candle. Anne did as she was told. With a sob, she cried. She got into bed. Marilla soon came back. She picked up the candle and stood at the doorway. Good night, she said. How can you say good night when it is the very worst night I've ever had in my whole life? She asked. Marilla did not know what to say, so she closed the door and went downstairs. Fine kettle of fish, she said. I suppose so, said Matthew sadly. You suppose so? Asked Marilla. Well, she's a nice little girl, said Matthew. It's a pity to send her back. You want to keep her? Exclaimed Marilla. What good would she be to us? Marilla, Matthew said, we might be some good to her. Anne cried herself to sleep that night, but when she woke up the next morning, she saw the blossoms of the cherry tree outside her window. She smiled. She did not notice when Marilla entered the room. It's time for you to dress, Marilla said. Oh, isn't it wonderful? Anne asked. It's a big tree, said Marilla, but the fruit doesn't amount to much. Not just the tree, said Anne. I mean the whole world. I can never be in the depths of despair in the morning. Isn't it splendid that there are mornings? Get dressed and never mind, said Marilla. The world is not as bad as it was last night, Anne said at breakfast table. I'm glad it's a sunshiny morning, but I like rainy mornings too. All mornings are interesting, don't you think? You talk too much for a little girl, said Marilla. Why don't you go outside until lunchtime?" Anne ran to the door, but stopped short. "What's the matter now?" asked Marilla. "There's no use loving Green Gables," said Anne. "If you go out and meet it, it won't be able to help loving it. What is the name of the geranium that's a flower on the windowsill?" "That's an apple-scented geranium," said Marilla. "Not that kind of name," Anne said. "I mean the name you gave it yourself. Maybe it hurts the geranium's feelings just to be called a geranium," said Anne. So now she's chirpy in the morning. She's happy, and that's the geranium, the apple geranium. She's asking the lady, what does she call it? Did she give it a name? Later that day, Marilla and Anne set out for the orphanage. Anne was quite quiet, which was unusual. "Tell me what you know about yourself," said Marilla. "How old are you?" "I was 11 last March," said Anne. "My father's name was Walter. My mother's name was Bertha. Aren't Walter and Bertha lovely names?" "It doesn't matter what a person's name is, as long as he behaves," said Marilla. I read once that a rose by another name would smell as sweet, but I don't know," Anne said. "How could a rose be as nice if it is called skunk cabbage?" Marilla tried not to laugh. "Anyway," said Anne, "my parents died when I was 3 months." "Where did you go?" Marilla asked sadly. "Mrs. Thomas took me in," said Marilla. "When she died, I lived with Mrs. Hammond. When Mrs. Hammond died, I went to the orphanage." Marilla did not ask any more questions. It's no longer matter if the orphanage made a mistake. Marilla would take Anne home for a while. So she's not going to take her to the orphanage. She's going to take her back to the house. I think she felt bad for the girl. Marilla took Anna up to the bed that night. "Last night you didn't say your prayers," said Marilla. "I never say prayers," said Anne. "Don't you know you should say your prayers?" asked Marilla. "Mrs. Thomas told me God made my hair red, and I'll never cared for him since," said Anne. "I say my prayers if it pleases you, but you'll have to tell me what to say." "Kneel down by the bed," said Marilla. "Why do people kneel to pray?" asked Anne. "If I really wanted to pray, I'd go out to the big field and look up into the sky. What next?" "Just thank God for your blessings and ask him humbly for the things you want," said Marilla. "Heavenly Father," began Anne, "I thank thee for Green Gables. That's all the blessings I can think of just now. I want a lot of things, but I'll only say the most important one. Please let me stay at Green Gables. Yours respectfully, Anne." Anne paused and then looked at Marilla. "Did I do it right?" she asked. Marilla did not know what to say, so she just tucked Anne into bed. "Oh, I should have said amen like they do in church," said Anne. "Do you think it will make any difference?" "I don't suppose it will," said Marilla. Now, good night." Before Anne came downstairs the next morning, Marilla talked to Matthew. "Anne may stay, Matthew," said Marilla. "I'll do my best to bring her up." "I knew you'd see it like that," Matthew said. "She is an interesting little thing." "It'll be better if she was a useful little thing," said Marilla. When Anne came into the room, she was shaking from head to toe. "Are you going to send me away then?" asked Anne. "Matthew and I decided to keep you," said Marilla. "I'm crying," said Anne. "I can't think why. I'm glad, but I'm glad doesn't seem the right word. It's something more than glad. Why am I crying?" "You're all worked up," said Marilla. "Sit down and calm yourself." "What am I to call you?" asked Anne. "Can I call you Aunt Marilla?" You call me just plain Marilla, said Marilla. I love to call you Aunt Marilla, said Anne. I would make me feel better as if I really belonged to you. I'm not your aunt, so it wouldn't be fair, Marilla said. We will be friends. Anne smiled, and then she looked up at Matthew and Marilla. Oh, I'm so happy to be Anne of Green Gables, she said. So here she heard the good news that they're going to keep her and not take her back to the orphanage. And that's the end of the story. So, if you have a book to read or somebody to read to, go ahead and do so. Don't forget to fluctuate your voice. Change your voice with punctuation marks. Also think of the characters in the story. If you don't have a book, then go to the website or class tag and reread one of the reading papers that you have assigned to you on week 13. Now remember, if it's just one thing you have to keep reading and rereading, then do so, because practice makes perfect. So until next time, happy reading.